Cheer up, Fido. If he falls, we'll lose it again. Pop will quit and play golf. And we can plop and play video games.
Well, I hope the nation's youth really embraces baseball when it returns to its truncated 60-game season to start at the end of the month. Hi, this is Will O'Toole, welcoming you again to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History, where each week we try to entertain, educate, and enhance your love of sports and all things sports related. Before we begin with this week's edition, I'd like to extend a special shout out to the producer of the show, and that is Howie Fredericks, who does everything under the sun for me in terms of editing and adding graphics, adding audio, background music to make this show so professional. And he doesn't have a lot to work with, believe me, but has been an inspiration for me to continue to do the show. And I am really, really humbled by the opportunity. I want to just extend thanks to Howard and all the people at Park Ridge Television for allowing me to do this and allowing me to come into your homes and just really embracing the show. This week, Howard had mentioned that a viewer had asked if I would do something with the 71 World Series, and my first reaction was yes, because I love talking about the World Series. That one has a particular love by me for it because it went 7 games. And here's a little interesting tidbit, because I have done some investigation on this, but there's only been 40 Game 7 World Series. Now, that doesn't include the games way back when that actually played 9-game series, but no series ever went technically 9, although there was a 5-3 and a tie. I think that involved the Red Sox and the Pirates way back when. Anyway, 40 World Series have come down to a dramatic 7th game. And the funny thing is, I was really shocked by that, because when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it seemed like every year there was a Game 7. And my observation, my perspective is not without fact, because 1960 World Series, Pirates, Yankees, 7 games. 62 Giants, Yankees, 7 games. 64 Cardinals, Yankees, 7. 65 Minnesota, LA, 7 games. 67 Yaz and the Sox, 7 games against Gibson and the Cardinals. 68 the Tigers with Lolich and McLean go against Flood and Gibson and Brock in 1968 and the Cardinals. In 71, you have the Pirates and the Orioles going 7, and then you have 72, 73 with Oakland and the Reds and the Mets respectively going the full 7, and then it's wrapped up with the quintessential example of World Series games and how it should be played with the 75 World Series between the Reds, the Big Red Machine, and the Boston Red Sox, because many point to that series as resurrecting the game of baseball, reinvigorating it with the fans. So hopefully we can do it again, because baseball, as I stated in previous programs, has been waning in interest, especially with the younger generation. And there might be a reason for that as I segue into this, because in 71, it was also baseball took a risk, and they had been contemplating it for a while. And then they said, yep, we're going to do it. And I always thought it was Game 3, but it was Game 4 of the World Series between the Pirates and the Orioles, in which the first night game was broadcast from Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. Why I recall watching that game is because mistakenly, I thought the Orioles also showed up and played the World Series in orange uniforms. Now, I know for a fact that they have orange uniforms. Why? Because I have pictures of it, number one, but I do recall in 71 that they had worn it. So maybe I saw a picture or I saw a video of it. The Orioles would only wear it occasionally, even in 71. And today they're only doing it, let's say, on the first Sunday of every month or something like that. But it was a rare occasion. Now, you know, I have an affinity towards orange. I love the orange uniforms. I just think orange really is just a unique color for sports, and that's why I like it. And but when I show you this, oof, it might be your worst nightmare. All right, it might be more clockwork orange in terms of nightmare than really embracing the orange, full orange uniforms. This, though, also is a nice transition because this is your trivia question for today. Those are 4 pitchers standing there, all from the Orioles. They're all starters on that Orioles staff from 1971, and they share a number of things in common. One is they all played for Earl Weaver, yes, but they all won 20 games that year. All won at least 20 games that year. It's the last time in baseball history that has occurred, and probably the last time it is going to occur, probably for another 20, 25 years, as teams have gone to 5-man rotations, just making it more difficult, and 5, and maybe in some cases like Tampa Bay, where they're just throwing everybody out there, depending how the pitcher, how the manager feels and uses the metrics. But I will give you a hint. Number 22, he's on this side for me. That is a Hall of Fame pitcher. I always remarked he was kind of like the complement to Tom Seaver in the National League. Very similar. We'll talk about him in a little bit. The man standing next to him, yes, not only, here's a great trivia, is he the first pitcher to hit a grand slam in the World Series, ironically doing it the year before against the Reds for the Orioles, but he was also involved in probably the biggest court case outside of Curt Flood, but he was involved in the biggest court case in baseball history, and maybe the White Sox scandal, but he was also involved in the biggest court case in baseball history when Peter Seitz allowed him to become a free agent. The irony is he had already been retired, but was asked back by Marvin Miller to be on the case because the other member of that lawsuit was Andy Messersmith, and Miller was so afraid that Messersmith would sign with the Dodgers again. He didn't. He would sign after being granted free agency with the Atlanta Braves. This man, number 35, was a screwball. No, he wasn't a screwball, but he was a man who was known for throwing a great screwball. And I wish the screwball would make its return again, because when I was growing up, you had him, you had Tug McGraw, and Mike Marshall all throwing the screwball with success. The man in the middle, though, or right here, number 37, he's the guy, I'll give you bonus points if you can remember. Hint, he pitched for Detroit in the 68 World Series, and he also later went on to the San Diego Padres and pitched for them before being traded to the Baltimore Orioles and then winning 20 games in his first year under Earl Weaver and his great coaching staff. Of course, I always have to show, still love to this day, the Oriole logo. Love that bird. So animated, so cartoonish. It works. Sometimes you like the serious. I think I embrace that one because I think it so embodies what a baseball logo should be all about. And that Oriole, you know, if you've ever seen an Oriole, if you're a bird watcher, they are a gorgeous bird. And I think that picture really embraces the colors and how colorful that orange is and how it stands out even on a real bird. And of course, the Orioles were led by this man, certainly not a big bird. He was really about 5'6", never made it to the majors as a player, but he is seen as one of the greatest managers of all time, at least certainly in the last 50 years, and at least certainly he's up there with his contemporary. Earl Weaver, the manager of the Orioles, he wanted 3 things: fundamentals, good defense, and 3-run home runs. And that's where we break today. He got the fundamentals. The Orioles would lead the league each year in fewest runs allowed via the error. His pitching staff always had low amount of base on balls. And if they did serve up home runs, very rarely were there men on base. In fact, that starting staff was a combined 81 and 31 with an ERA of 2.89. Now, unfortunately, the weakness came, if you want to call it a weakness, that they totaled over 70% of the Orioles innings pitched that year at 2.89 ERA for the starting four. The bullpen and all the other pitchers combined for a 3.17 ERA, and they only threw a total of 354 innings. So Weaver really did rely on those big four. And maybe you can argue, maybe that came back to hurt him in the World Series. But let's go back to the World Series. 66, of course, Robinson. You know, he comes from Cincinnati, and there was an article that I read calling into question, was there any kind of rivalry between the two Robinsons? And Brooks has adamantly stated no, that they were definitely different personalities, definitely coming from a different perspective. Yes, one was black, one was white, one was in the organization for years, the other was coming from outside the organization and coming, of course, from the National League. But Brooks has often said that Frank put him over the top with his competitive, aggressive, all clean, hustle type of play, that he was probably one of the most competitive, if not the most competitive player that Brooks ever played with, and that the two really got together and embraced each other's skills, talents, and personalities to really turn that Oriole team into a championship team. Hey, listen, he comes over. You got to remember this. Go back. 64, Brooks is an MVP, leads the league in RBIs. One of the few times where two third basemen are named MVP, because you got Ken Boyer with St. Louis in the National League. And of course, that happens again in 1980 with Brett and Schmidt, respectively, in the American and National League. But Brooks wins the MVP in 64, so people knew how good he was. Obviously, Robinson was the better hitter, probably the better athlete. They used to laugh at what Brooks Robinson looked like, okay, because he certainly did not look like an athlete. He was an excellent basketball player in high school and was actually offered a scholarship to Arkansas, University of Arkansas, but elected to play baseball. Now, kid from Arkansas, could field, and here's the thing, those Gold Gloves that he wins, you got to remember this. Weaver had 4 Gold Gloves in his defensive alignment. He had Johnson at second. He had Belanger, the great Mark Belanger, at shortstop. He had Paul Blair in center. And, of course, he had Brooks Robinson. And I think that they used Brooks Robinson's backyard to dig for all the gold to make into the Gold Gloves. Now, why I say it's legitimate, because I know that many times we talk about fielding, and it's one of the toughest things to really gauge and use metrics for. And many coaches and scouts will say, I know who a good defensive fielder is by just seeing it. And to a certain extent, I understand exactly what they mean. But if you take a look at Robinson's, his assists, his putouts, the number of double plays he helped to turn, he is just light years ahead of his contemporaries. Now, the argument is always made, well, maybe he played for a ground ball team. Maybe he played against teams, he had 2 lefties in on the mound for the Orioles in 71. So maybe it was conducive to him getting more plays and all the rest of it. I would say this, that could be all true. But Robinson, I'm telling you right now, the number of putouts and assists that he has is so much higher than everybody else that it's beyond all of those other elements. And don't forget, he's playing with a Gold Glove right next door in Mark Belanger, all right, who's probably gobbling up balls that maybe he would have taken with an inferior. And he had Aparicio there for a little bit as well. Another great defensive shortstop. Here's the other thing, though, and this is the problem with errors and all the rest of it, and I've seen this. You could have a very good player who's a great defensive player who's charged with an error, and I think of Ozzie Smith in an All-Star game, if I recall, if it was an All-Star game, and he's charged with an error on a ball that nobody else would have gotten to. Or you have, and everyone's played softball, with the guy who simply cannot move. You put him anywhere, and the ball could be hit 2 inches next to him, and he won't even try. He doesn't get any leather on the ball, and it comes in as a base hit. And then you got another guy, the ball glances off, and what's the old adage? Well, if it hit your glove, you should have caught it. That's not necessarily true. So Robinson was a great fielder, probably beyond everyone else. And if you note, just take a look at that 70 series. He stole that series from the Reds. I think he robbed both May and Bench collectively of about 7, and Perez too, probably about 7 or 8 hits. 7 or 8 hits that could have made a bigger deal in that series. So you have Earl Weaver. And of course, on the National League side, you have a guy named Danny Murtaugh, who won 2 World Series for a franchise that had only won 1 prior to that and has only won 1 after it. Danny Murtaugh, I think he's sometimes underrated. You know, Murtaugh, do you realize that Murtaugh in September of that 71 fielded the first all I shouldn't say black, but I'll tell you this, it was the first all-minority team on the field. They had Doc Ellis on the mound, Manny Sanguine at first, at catcher, I think Willie Stargell played first. Then you have Dave Cash, Rennie Stennett, and a guy at shortstop named Jackie Hernandez. Now, look, I'm just battling off names. It could have been also Jose Pagan at third base, the old New York Giant, or San Francisco Giant. And then in the outfield, you had Gene Clines, Al Oliver in center, and Roberto Clemente. 9 guys. And Danny Murtaugh, I think, was an underrated manager because if you know, in 60 he leaves, or right after winning that World Series he leaves, maybe in a couple of years later, then returns and guides the Pirates to a number of 90-win seasons. Not only does he win in 70, the NL East, he wins in 71, 72, 74. All right? 74 was Bill Verde, but he did an unbelievable job, and he really guided that team through the loss of Clemente. They had a tough season in 73, but he guided them through it. Actually, it wasn't him. Pardon me. It wasn't. I think it was Bill Verdon who was the 73. So I take that back. I apologize. But I think you get the idea. Murtaugh was a really underrated manager. In that 71 season, you also have, when I say that you have that World Series, you have Brooks, Frank, and Jim Palmer, all Hall of Famers. On the other side, you have Clemente. Oh, and Weaver. He's a Hall of Famer. And you have Clemente and Stargell, who are Hall of Famers for the Pirates. Could have been a couple others. But, you know, their careers. And speaking of which, here's some of the players of that day. You have Andy Etchebarren. I will tell you this. The Orioles never had a really good catcher, but Weaver was able to piece together a catching tandem. I don't have a picture of Elrod Hendricks. Elrod Hendricks, he's one of the few ball players from the Virgin Islands. But in 1970, I was looking this up, the Oriole tandem of Etchebarren and Elrod Hendricks had a 47% pickoff of runners trying to steal the bases. That's incredible. That's incredible. So Elrod would play most of the time against righties. Andy Etchebarren would play against lefties. Elrod was the better hitter and overall the better player. I think, though, that Andy Etchebarren was probably the better defensive player. Okay? And, of course, Elrod is involved in that crazy play in 1970 with Bernie Carbo, where he phantom tagged Carbo coming in to never score until after the argument ensues. He tagged him with his mitt instead of the ball. And of course, that was another thing. It just kept, for the poor Reds, it just kept piling on top of another. It was called out. Probably never would happen in today's technology crazed look at the camera and all the rest of it. Here's some other ball players. I know, you can say, man, this guy, he just loves Boog Powell, but Boog just had a great name. 70 MVP. He's a great guy. He's had some tough years lately, but if you ever go down to Camden Yards, he does have that barbecue pit, and I think he still operates it. You'll see him around the ballpark and all the rest of it. But Boog had some great years. Great opposite field power, too. Not the best. He was not all that agile at first. He just got the job done. But he was lucky he had Dave Johnson playing second. He had Mark Belanger playing short. And, of course, the great Brooks. And here's Kurt Monton. Monton, of course, was the reason I put it in, and that's not even a 71 card, but Monton was on those teams. The reason I put him in is that I always thought it was kind of cool. He was a teammate of Tom Seaver when they played in the Alaska League. And I actually had seen a game between, I think, when I was in Alaska, got to see the Fairbanks Miners play, I think, the Palouse County Cougars, who had a guy by the name of John Olerud on the squad. That Palouse County team was just another way of saying the Washington State Cougars. And the most fascinating thing is when the game ended, I'm walking back to the hotel, and it's a beautiful blue sky. The sun is shining, and I'm looking around. I was going to get something to eat, and every place is closed. And then I realized it was 12 o'clock at night, not noon, and the sun was shining. So amazing. Here is, before we get into the 71 series, here it is. Let's just get right to it. All right. By the way, I think it was Bill Verdon who takes the team because Mazeroski, I think Murtaugh retired because of health concerns. He had a bad heart. So I'm going to say, though, he does win. I think it's 72. Bill Verdon takes over the team. So I apologize if I misled you there. Here is a picture. This is 71, but I don't recall ever having won that particular baseball card. And I always thought it was a different card from 71, but I'm not the Topps baseball card expert. And, of course, right next to Clemente is Richie Hebner. And then this is Manny Sanguillen. I loved when Topps did these kind of cards. Instead of where the guy is swinging the bat like Richie Hebner, they had him in just casual moments. That one is a great one with Manny Sanguillen, who is definitely a character. I was told years ago by a former professional player and teammate of his that he actually walloped a single with a lead warm-up bat. A leaded bat, a weighted bat, and he swung. Like I said, strong guy, and that he also was really the strongest guy on that Pirate team. Pretty impressive. And I just wish he had a better career. He did make a few all-star teams. I just thought he was going to be a better player. And, of course, this is probably one of my favorite Pirate cards, and this is Roberto Clemente. He looks very introspective. He was very complex. Not that we aren't all complex, but I know that when baseball players or athletes are deemed as complex, that means it's just like code for they had other things on their mind besides the next batted ball or the next pitcher in the next game and all the rest of it. And how can I prove that? I can this way. Clemente sacrificed his life to bring supplies to an earthquake-ravaged Central American nation in Nicaragua, December on New Year's Eve, 1972. The plane never got off, basically it never really got off the ground and plunged into the ocean. 37 years old. Clemente, these are the ones. This is a great picture. Maybe it could be suitable for framing. Tell me that isn't a great picture of the two next to each other. Now listen, I just copy pasted that. It's nothing novel or anything like that, but you can see both right fielders, both Hall of Famers. Robinson is number 20. Clemente, number 21. Both great hitters. I'm not going to say who I would take on my team. That's not fair because I would take them both. Different ball players. Different. I would probably say that people would probably say that Clemente was probably the better quote unquote hitter, but I think that is really not true. I mean, Robinson could hit. He could hit with power. I mean, he won the batting championship and he won the Triple Crown. My feeling is that I think that Clemente, you could say, was, how do I say this without getting all those Frank Robbins, especially my brother Jim, upset? But I would say that Clemente might be the better all-round player in terms of defense and the arm. But then again, maybe with the exception of Willie Mays and Johnny Bench, and maybe today, let's say an Ozzie Smith, who had a better arm than Clemente in right field. And the interesting thing is, in that 1971 series, his arm, all right, was what really made him in that World Series. And it wasn't a play like Willie Mays where he makes the out. In fact, Clemente in deep right makes the catch, spins, throws the ball from a corner in Memorial Stadium, and throws it all the way to third base. And Richie Hebner, I believe, is the third baseman at the time, just misses, or they just miss getting the out on Merv Redmond, who had tagged up from second and wheeled to third. And when they show you the different camera angles, or they show you in stop action, man, it's just a hair-splitting moment that Redmond gets in there. But that throw really put Clemente into the minds of America. I mean, he did hit. He is one of the few players. I think he's one of two players, and it might be Hank Bauer. I'm not sure because I didn't look that up, or I'm just running the thing. But definitely Clemente is the only National Leaguer to hit in every World Series game he ever played. Now, you can say, wow, you can play in one, and it only goes 4 games or something like that. Yeah, but he played in 2 7-game series, 11 years apart, against the Yankees and the Orioles, 2 probably the monster teams of their times when you think about it, along with the A's in the American League, or soon to be the A's. But he had a 14-game hitting streak. And I guarantee you that if he was able somehow to play until 1979, he would have been another 8 years, 45 years old. I bet you that Chuck Tanner would have inserted him into the lineup. He would have gotten a hit in every game. He was that good. And I just loved his little kick. But Frank Robinson, let me tell you, he takes a backseat to nobody. Now, here's the fun. Game 1 of the World Series, and I'm rooting for the Pirates. And they promptly go out and lose a tough one, and you're worried if you are a Pirates fan, because the next day they get dumped by the Orioles. The only non-close game. I know that Game 3 was 5-1, but that was really a 2-1 game until Bob Robertson hit a 3-run bomb, even though he was supposed to bunt on the play. That's another story. But this fella, Doc Ellis, people always say to me, where do you come up with these trivia questions or these little stats and stuff? Here's what happens. Sometimes it's really more inspiration. I think God just hits me with a lightning rod in my head and says, hey, look this up. I think it might be interesting. And maybe it's not interesting, but it is kind of cool. So I'm looking this guy up, Doc Ellis, and I realized that he lost the 71 All-Star game. He's the guy that gives up the bomb to Reggie Jackson and basically launches Jackson's career. And of course, that 71, I want to spend some time on that separately. That 71 All-Star game is unbelievable with all the Hall of Famers in that game, and they all just perform like Hall of Famers. But Doc Ellis is the losing pitcher in that game, and the reason why it stood out for so long is that was the first All-Star game that the National League had lost since I was watching it. And they hadn't lost a World Series, an All-Star game in a while. And then they didn't lose one for a while until '83 when Fred Lynn hits the grand slam against Otley Hammaker and really ignites the American League. So then I'm saying, hey, he lost. And then I'm looking up the research for the '71 World Series, and I find out that Doc Ellis lost the '71 All-Star game, plus he lost Game 1. And it just got me thinking, hey, listen, how many guys have lost the All-Star game and the first game of an All-Star? And I worked my way back from 2019 all the way to 1933. And I really thought I had kind of a cool little oddity here until I got to 2012. And then I was like, whoa, this happened too fast. And just to give a real quick thing, Justin Verlander started for the Tigers in the All-Star game and started Game 1 of the World Series against San Francisco, lost both games. So then I'm saying, okay, Hall of Famer. Okay, that makes sense. Let's just see who's the next one. I'm thinking maybe I got to go another 10 years. The following year, or the previous year, 2011, C.J. Wilson of Texas loses the All-Star game and loses the first game of the World Series. So now I'm thinking, okay, it's got to, this can't be all the time, because even in the back of my mind, I'm saying I know who won, who lost, and all the rest of it, or you even think about who was in the World Series, etc. Then I go to 2008. Scott Kazmir does it for Tampa Bay. He loses the All-Star game and loses against Philadelphia in the first game. So now I'm saying, wow, is this too common to the point where it's not really that cool of a thing? Well, I keep going back. I go to 2000. I go to 1990s, all through the 90s, all through the 80s, and then 79, 78, 77, all the way back to Doc Ellis in 71. So there's only 4 guys in the last 71 to 19, that's 29, 38 years, 37 All-Star games. Then I said, all right, maybe the same thing. I go all the way back to 56, nothing. I go back to all the way from 1955 to 50, nothing. Then I get to 1949, and it starts again. Don Newcomb, Brooklyn Dodgers, loses for the National League, loses for the Dodgers Game 1 of the World Series. And it doesn't happen again. And it's the first time it happens, actually, in the history of baseball. 1942, when Mort Cooper of the St. Louis Cardinals loses the All-Star game and then loses Game 1 of the World Series. And then it hits me. Here's another thing that starts. Cooper is also the only pitcher to lose consecutive All-Star games in a row. He lost the 42 and he lost the 43. Now, there have been other guys like Dwight Gooden who have lost 2 games in the All-Star, but nobody, as far as I can see, and of course I would redo this, but nobody has lost 2 in a row except Mort Cooper. And that happened in the very beginning of the All-Star game. So just a little trivia, little fun, have some fun with it. And that's what happened. I'll tell you this too, in that 71 series, here's the other thing that really sets apart. And even though Clemente hit .414, it came down to that dramatic 7th game, and Clemente hits a home run. It's one of those games that goes not so much back and forth, but it's a pitcher's duel through the first 3. And as a baseball watcher and as a fan, as a outside viewer, as a player who played softball, not at big heights or anything like that, I'm just your weekend warrior, but you start to sense the longer the game goes on and it becomes a hotly contested game, just a pitcher's battle, the more pressure you're really putting on the pitcher. 4th inning, finally, and maybe this is what made the MVP, Clemente hits a solo home run, and that puts them up in front, 1-0. Steve Blass, though, continues to go along. He's working. They tie it up, the Baltimore Orioles, and then like in the 7th or 8th inning, the Orioles give up the run. It was a funny thing, single by or double by Stargell and a single by Jose Pagan, the old San Francisco Giant, that helps them get across the winning run. It's funny because Stargell does the same thing in Game 7 in the 79 series, becomes quite a player there too. And, when he wins his MVP of the World Series and also MVP during the regular season, he has a Frank Robinson type of year. But that 71, now it is Steve Blass taking the mound in the last of the ninth at Baltimore. He's only up 2-1. And what if you can take a look on YouTube if you ever see this, but they always talk about the metrics and, the defensive placements and all the rest of it. Some of these guys were ahead of their time. Real quick, Earl Weaver used to keep index cards in boxes that had the record of every player he had on his team and his performance against opposing pitchers and vice versa, which was one of the reasons why Mark Belanger, who was not a very good hitter at all, but he would always play against the fireballing Nolan Ryan, and he hit him well for some strange reason. How did Weaver know that? He kept a book on it. Things that you're seeing today with all the metrics, Weaver was doing it way back when. Why do I say this? Because in 71, the Pirates had to face Frank Robinson, Boog Powell, and Merv Rettenmund, who was having a very good season that year. He hit over 300 with 15 home runs or so. And then Brooks would hit. But those three guys came up in the bottom of the ninth. He gets Frank on a pop-up, I believe. However, they get Boog Powell on a ground out with Cash moving slightly over. But the most important one, if you see it, Merv Rettenmund is up. And Merv Rettenmund is a right-handed hitter. And if you take a look, they shift Jackie Hernandez, who Danny Murtaugh was a little bit concerned because Hernandez was a young guy taking the place of Gene Alley, Jose Pagan. And so he was thrust into a big spot there in the World Series. Murtaugh moves him over. And Merv Rettenmund hits the ball right where basically Hernandez was resituated. And he guns him out for the final out to Bob Robertson. And the Pirates win the World Series. And what I'm saying is there's so many complaints about the defensive shifting. I know you had the Williams shift back in the 40s with Lou Boudreau of the Indians coming up with it. But you've always had shifts if you were paying attention. And today's defensive shifts, I absolutely love it. Why? Because everybody complains about it. And my whole point is this. Well, if you're a dead pull hitter and you're complaining because the shortstop and the third baseman move closer to the line because they know statistically and by percentage that you pull the ball down the line, and then you complain about it during one of your 3 or 4 strikeouts in the game, then go the other way. Lay down a bunt. Change it up. It might be worth one at bat. Anyway, that World Series was hotly contested. Great series. By the way, Game 6, you have to remember this. The Pirates down 2-0. I don't know whether anyone's really giving them a chance. They come back. They even give up 3 runs in the third game. First home game at Pittsburgh since 1960 for a World Series. First World Series game in Three Rivers in their history. Another cookie cutter. It was an ugly ballpark. Same with Riverfront. And yet they are endowed with so much history of those glory day Pirates of the 70s. Anyway, Bruce Keeson, just a rookie, settles in and pitches 5 innings of scoreless ball. And Game 3, the Pirates rally after scoring 2 in the first. So they're down 3-2 in the bottom of the first. They rally and they win the game. 4-3. They had 14 hits in that game. And as I always like to say, for every 2 hits, you should have a run. So really, the Pirates probably should have had 7 runs. But the story in that game was Keeson. Game 4, maybe I'm messing this up. No, I don't think so. Game 4 was won 5-1. Or excuse me. Pardon me. Excuse me. Long day. Game 3, okay, was won 5-1. Steve Blass settles in. Game 4 was the Keeson game, and that was also played at night. I know that, all right? And they rally in that game because Clemente and I think Frank Robinson both homer in that game, but Clemente hits his first home run in that game. They rally, they win the game 4-3. The game that really stands out for me, though, is Game 5 because Nelson Briles was on the mound, and he had pitched with the Cardinals in their World Series. And he spins a gem. He wins the game 2-0. And all I remember is this. Just like the Pirate hitters had weird stances and idiosyncrasies, some of those Pirates really had some different windups. Bruce Keeson, of course, was underhand or sidearm. And Nelson Briles in that Game 5 was constantly, he seemed to be falling off the mound. And he pitched brilliantly. Probably the greatest game in his career. Pirates win 2-0. Now they go back to Memorial Stadium, and they're up. And what happens? Game 6 is a classic. It goes extra innings. And the Robinson guys win the game for the Orioles. Frank scores on a sacrifice fly by Brooks Robinson in the bottom of the 10th to give him a 4-3 win. And the funny thing is, I remember that, you could probably see it in the cameras, Sanguine goes up in the air and tries to make the tag, and man, Frank Robinson, a great National League slide that he was known for, and they win the game. And of course, the next day, they go pretty much 3 scoreless innings. Clemente hits a home run. They take a precious 1-0 lead. It's tied 1-1. And then Willie Stargell, the future Hall of Famer and future MVP in another World Series against the same team, the Orioles, scores the winning run. So that's 4 Hall of Famers winning games, right? All being part of the winning run. Last thing, and then I'll let you go. These are the 4 pitchers, all dressed in orange. 4 pitchers for the Orioles. Number 22 is Jim Palmer, a great pitcher. I know that some people think he always complained, and take a look at his stats. He pitched a ton of innings and came back from arm troubles to have a Hall of Fame career. Number 19, of course, is Dave McNally, one of the few players from Montana. He was from Billings. This is Mike Cuellar, the screwball pitcher who had his career resurrected by the Baltimore Orioles. And then number 37, that is Pat Dobson, who won 20 games, and I do believe he was the last of the Oriole pitchers to secure the 20th win. And so that they could have this great trivia question for me, and still may be, and they still are, the last 4 guys to win 20 games in the same season for the same team. This is Will O'Toole thanking you once again for being part of Park Ridge Sports History, and I will see you soon. Thank you again for joining me. Bye now.